So I'm really happy to introduce this session. Monika Herzig from Germany, joining us from Germany on Zoom today, possesses a doctorate in music education, and groups under her leadership have toured Germany, open for acts such as Tower of Power, Sting, the Dixie Dregs, Yes, and more. Her newest project, She Rose, features the world's leading female jazz instrumentalists, including Letty Stern, Jamie Baum, Ingrid Jensen, Jennifer Vincent, Ada Rovetti, Mira Casales, Routledge, and more. Sorry for my pronunciation. Our moderator today is Jeremy Brown from the University of Calgary. He's an award-winning saxophonist, teacher, composer, author, and conductor who lives in Calgary, Alberta. He's a professor of music at the University of Calgary since 1990 and performs as a jazz, classical, and free improviser, primarily on sax. He's also a woodwind doubler and performs as a flautist, clarinetist, and on penny whistle. And he is also a member of the Jazz YYC Board of Directors and heads the chair and outreach committee. And so a major creator of this conference as well, as it's done through our outreach committee. So thank you. And I turn the floor over to you. We have until about 11 o'clock.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Deb. And welcome, Monika. So good to see you again. And I'm just going to turn it over to you and we'll go from there.
Okay, let's keep moving. So I'm going to share the screen here and start the presentation because what I want to do is give some overview. We have this incredible new book that came out just a few months ago, the Routledge Companion to Jazz and Gender, which also, yeah, thank you. and our host contributed a chapter. That's why he's the proud owner of one of those books. And there's 38 chapters of wisdom and thoughts. And, you know, one of the things, something that I'm really passionate about is that we've been talking about these issues for a long time now, for 50 something years, but the change is still slow. So I always encourage everybody to think while we're talking and go away with one thing that you can do today in your community to move in the direction you want to move. So that's my goal. And just short correction, I'm actually tuning in from Vienna in Austria, and I'm spending a year right now here teaching or as professor of artistic research. I came after 34 years at Indiana University. And I so wish I was in Calgary. And next year I want to be there because it's one of my favorite places that I want to get back to. So we'll make that happen too. So co-editors of this volume, James Redden from Western Oregon University and Michael Carr, actually from Klagenfurt and from the Jam Lab here in Vienna. And there should be flyers that can be shared also. I think every library anywhere should have this volume by now and spread the word. So usually, you know, I'm not sure I can get the answer so I can hear you, but I usually do a quick thinking exercise of thinking, okay, just shout out 5 female vocalists.
Bessie Smith.
Bessie Smith shouldn't be too hard, right? From the room to
Deb Rasmussen.
Are we at 5?
Sarah Vaughan.
That's kidding.
There we go. Yeah, it's rolling. Okay, try 5 pianists.
Lila. Michelle Gregoire.
Trish Edwards.
All right. It sounds like that's going really well too. I'm throwing myself in the pot too. Okay, 5 trombonists. Throw out 5 trombonists.
No, but listen.
Jennifer Wharton.
Jennifer Wharton.
Did we get there? My one, her name is actually Reud Regev. I'll just help pronounce it.
We got the three. I think we got three.
Three. Okay, my trombone is Reud Regev. And okay, so it's getting a little harder, right? How are we doing on 5 bassists?
Oh boy.
Julie Crosby. Esperanza.
Yes. Esperanza Spalding. Yeah.
Randy Disterheft.
Randy Disterheft.
Oh,
Elaine, Beryl Booker trio, bass player. Elaine, something. Gabby Lackensay.
okay. Sounds like we got that too. How about 5 drummers?
Yeah.
Terry Lynn.
Tara Lynn, yeah. Who else?
Alice Miller.
Alice Miller.
Who's Valerie? No. The drummer.
That's a little harder one.
But right. So I mean, we can get there. So I love actually 2 things that come out of this. A, that you naming all the great Canadian players. It's a whole different pool than we usually draw from. But B, I mean, you see why I'm doing this. It's just to see how we have to start thinking once we get into some more of the unconventional instruments, and it gets slim picking. And so that's one of the reasons. So my chapter in the book was actually on the role of all female groups. I'm leading this one, the Shiros, since 2014. Here we are actually in Austria at the Porgy and Bess Club in 2014, 2019. And, these are amazing players, and all the ones you named. And there should be household names. And for some reason, they're not. And that's part of what we're looking at. So I was looking at, is it just a gimmick, or is there actually a role to these? And that's what I'm also hoping to discuss, some of the barriers and some of the roles. And of course, I'm sure you all have followed this amazing project that Tara Lynn Carrington just put together with the new standards and those 101 lead sheets. It's, I talked to her, that picture was taken just first weekend of October when she played at the Indie Jazz Fest, and the book was sold out after 2 days. They had to reprint it. And what she did is just say, well, everybody keeps saying, well, there's not enough resources, there's not enough music, let's just put some resources together and see what it does. And it's going really well, and I'm honored to have one of my tunes in there too. That's a great honor to have there. So one thing, and I'm hoping we can have some input on that on Jeremy too. One thing that's clear is that women have been part of this business from the beginning. They were always there. And especially during the Second World War, we had these amazing big bands that were touring the USO basis, the International Sweethearts of Rhythm being one of the most popular ones. But once the men returned from the war, they unfortunately were disbanded. This specific one is an interesting story because it came out of an orphanage in Mississippi, and the young girls started touring, and then they actually decided to jump ship because they saw the opportunity that they could do what they love to do in this environment. And the story of Billy Tipton is one of the more extreme ones, where we have somebody who started cross-dressing, realizing, well, I can get more gigs by being, changing my attire. So, but why, what's going on in terms of numbers or participation. And one thing, what I already pointed out, is that unfortunately, a lot of these changes or things that we see are still pretty recent. It was not till 1977 when George Wein challenged Marion McPartland for the Women in Jazz Festival in Kansas City, saying there's no way you can get an all-female group together, and she had to prove it. And in all aspects, it's 81. We have the first female judge in Supreme Court, and so on. In the orchestral world, I'm in Vienna right now, and the Vienna Philharmonic still has a very small percentage of female players. And it's not until 2014 that Tara Lynn Carrington won the first jazz instrumental Grammy. And, even recently, there's several studies that, especially over Europe, came out in Germany. They had a big study in France, in Italy. And in Germany, for example, they have those big full-time radio big bands. And Carolina Strassmeyer and the WDR big band and one more are still the only female members. So the numbers are still dismal. And even some documentation, came out in the country music world not too long ago, where one of the radio programmers, admitted how they put the mix together in order to cater what they think they need to cater to, saying, I'm catering to female listeners, and I have to make it like a salad where it's the male country artist, and then I'll sprinkle the females like tomato on the lettuce. And of course, it caught a lot of controversy. But, this is the country world, but there's a lot of parallels. And some of the things, when you dig into what's going on socially and culturally, what we have to realize that we just came out of this area of post-feminism that was cultivated after the initial wave of feminism, where we had the concept of the alpha girl that was reinforced, meaning if you're just good enough and better than everybody else, you will claim your place. Which, of course, is true, and of course is a good thing to strive for. But what it does, it cultivates a competitive culture where you have very limited spaces. And in order to get to those limited spaces, you have to make sure you work as a competitor and take the competition out, so to say, in order to get there, which is not a healthy culture. And it shouldn't be like that. So we're just getting over that. But of course, it was the anti-wave of, the feminism where it protected the existing structure to some degree. And the other thing we have to realize is the stereotyping that we still run against, meaning we have specific preconceptions of how things should be or should not be. And it's interesting, even just a week ago, I had a conversation here with somebody who was convinced that there's no way that, females have enough lung power for the physical demands of playing jazz. I thought that was a discussion of the 50s in downbeat, and I run into somebody who was still telling me that. So meaning, and every time, I go on stage, I can bet on it that somebody will come up and say, "Are you going to sing tonight?" And I'm going, "Nope." No singing for me. You don't want to hear me sing. But it's just this conception that once a female enters the stage, it's probably the singer. And what it does is, realizing those stereotypes, it makes people under or overperform instead of just doing what they do in a natural way. And there's lots of studies, looking at mass tests. This is not the only field where you have this, and so in this book, Claude Steele demonstrates quite a few of these examples, and this under and over or overperforming because of stereotypes. And the other stereotyping part, of course, is the instrument choice too, that initially often, the girls work towards the piano and the flute and the violin, and then the boys go towards the brass instruments. And what it does is, it causes this dropout rate also that was observed. So two of my companions from Indiana University, Ariel Alexander and Natalie Boink, did quite extensive dissertations on the issue. And Natalie especially looked at, she also has a chapter in the book, she especially looked at why is it that it seems after middle school, there's this dropout rate. So there's half and half. The bands look pretty even. You get to high school, it's about a third, and you get to college and it starts to be very slim pickings. And there's several things, of course, the instrument choice initially, but also some of the teaching strategies, which is interesting, because when we introduce improvisation, it's at the time when the girls are in puberty, and it's very difficult for them to raise their hand and volunteer when somebody says, oh, who wants to take a solo, to stand up and do that, because it's risky and they might look not perfect in front of their peers, and girls in puberty just don't do that. I'm doing some workshops right now here around Vienna in schools to get kids excited about jazz, and every time there's the one or two girls that just go out in tears or try to hide because they are so afraid of engaging in this process. So if we can find, better teaching strategies, more inclusive ones of safe spaces, giving everybody a part, because what happens is then the great divide gets bigger and bigger, and by the time we get to high school, they're going, well, I don't sound as good as the boys, because of course, if you don't engage in as often, it's hard to progress, and that's where we lose a lot of them too. And here's a unfortunate sample story. When I talked to Sherry Miracle, here's another drummer. I'm not sure she got mentioned in our list, but she's the leader of Diva since 25 years and has been around for a minute. But she always wanted to be in the Woody Herman band, and she sent in a cassette, and they all listened. Cassettes were blind. They liked the tape, and then she later found out that, once they looked at who actually made the tape, they actually threw it away and laughed that it couldn't be. So why now this all-female environments or groups or the Jazz Girls Days that we do? So something that comes out is it's just important to have these safe spaces and these support groups where it's okay to not look perfect. It's okay to come up. This is a picture of our Jazz Girls Day just last March. 30 girls, and they were so excited, and nobody had any preconceptions. It was all good. Of course, the putting different visual aspects on stage is important to change these stereotypes to visual barriers. And, I can tell you from touring with the Shiros over the last 8 years, I see that the audience is different. Usually the hardcore jazz fans will not come. It's a different audience, which is good because we're reaching new people, but it's also sad because, we want to be part of this jazz community. And why is it also important? It's important to make spaces beyond those 2% alpha females. Of course, we will always have the great musicians. And, I'm looking at the roster of performers that you have at the festivals. I'm going, oh, these are all my sheroes and amazing musicians. But there's there's a lot in the middle, and they have the same right to be space. And then, fourth, we are saying that jazz is a democratic art form with equal participation, and then it should be a democratic art form with equal participation. And yes, it most likely will sound a little different, but that's okay, because I guess it's supposed to be a representation of society and who we are and this part. So we'll see. There's a link to the Katie Ray's documentary, In Her Hands. It's a great documentary that she did that shows a lot of these issues. And one thing that I want to put in the room, and then I want to give Jeremy a few minutes to also share his writing in the book. But one of my friends put it really well. She said, equality does not mean sameness, meaning that it shouldn't be in a way where one group tries to be like something else, but it should be a way where everybody has the right to be who they are and share that. How can we do that? Well, fostering those safe environments. If we are in a position of recruiting, putting programs together, making sure we have an equal distribution, educators, panelists, even for awards. If you have award panels and you put your award panel together, it's important to have a diverse group. To advocate for more participation in all aspects, to look at teaching curricula, especially at our secondary level, and see how we can be more inclusive and make sure we don't lose anybody on the way. And then just overall media representation, what kind of pictures are we putting out there, what kind of audio, and just common rhetoric. It's really interesting. I'm since a month here in Vienna, and I have to go back to speaking German quite a bit. And in that language, they really made a change, because you have gendered language. You have the 3 different articles, and she and he and it, and all the words, the whole language has changed. You always have to have the feminine ending in there. But in the American language, it's not quite that easy, and you're still talking about the good guys and hey man, and so it's little things that do make a difference too. So I'm gonna stop sharing here for a minute, and Jeremy, I'll let you share what you contributed to the book and what the role it has in there, and hopefully we'll have 10 minutes left to take a few questions.
Thanks, Monika. It's so interesting to hear you talk about the issues of gender in jazz, because it is it's so pervasive. The division or the divisiveness between men and women in jazz has been going on for so long. My chapter specifically dealt with the notion of patronage with 2 women, Helen Joyner, who was the wife of Lee Morgan. And she was not a musician, actually, but she was an enabler. She was a supporter of Lee Morgan, as you may or may not have known. For about 7 years, she pulled him out of the gutter. He had a heroin addiction. He had sold his trumpet. She clothed him. She fed him, brought him back from the brink of death, really. And he went on to do 8 more recordings for Blue Note. And then she murdered him. And the issue behind that is simply that he was his own, I don't know how to say this any more elegantly, but as so many jazz musicians, male, he was his own worst enemy. He recognized women as something to be used and to put them in a position of as sex objects, as someone that can cook, and not treating them really in a fair and reasonable fashion. So that in itself, of course, is the subject of a movie that was an award-winning film a few years back. The other person that struck me as being very interesting was the wife of the second wife of Louis Armstrong. Lil Hardin was her name, Lil Hardin Armstrong. Lil gets very little credit for allowing Louis Armstrong to become actually the icon of the cornet that he was. She encouraged him to go to New York City to join the Fletcher Henderson Band, which was really the open sesame for his career. He didn't stay in New York. He came back to Chicago, but she really was the force behind him in the 1920s up to the early 1930s in the success of his career. One could say the Hot 5 and Hot 7 recordings were because of Lil. She gets absolutely no credit for that, although she composed a number of the compositions that they recorded. And until her death, a few months after his death in 1971, Louis and Lil both argued over the provenance of some of those recordings. Again, Louis was not, he was a sexist and a bit of a misogynist. He didn't treat Lil in a fair fashion. And of course, Monika, as you pointed out, she was also stereotyped. She was a pianist. And she made the point that in Chicago, she would be playing with the jazz band with Louis Armstrong. The men would come in from the Paul Whiteman or other visiting orchestras, and they would ignore her completely. They would talk to Louis and the other men in the band, but she was a non-entity. And she made a point of saying that, oh, I guess that's just the way it is. So anyway, the notion of women is in this new book I'm writing on for Routledge, A New Perspectives on Jazz Patronage, includes a fairly large segment on gender and those related issues, both through women that are musicians and women that were simply spouses and wives and that sort of thing. So thanks for the opportunity for my chapter to be in the book. It was a great encouragement to pursue this notion of patronage.
Very cool. I'm glad there's more projects coming out of that.
Yep.
But that's true. I mean, those are, little examples or case studies, but they document those tricky relationships. And actually Lil Hardin, those first recordings were in Indiana at the Jeanette Studios in Richmond, Indiana. They would come down from Chicago and on the Great Railroad, and it was the early 20s. And the story is that Lil actually was the one saying to Louis, hey, you're so much better than King Oliver. You should start your own band, and kind of gave him the kick to, to move forward.
That's right.
So I'm curious, if there's questions. I don't see people, but I'm sure that can be moderated. So I'm curious if there's people, or if there's things people would like to talk about or question or discuss a bit more.
Yeah. I have a question. It's Deb with Jazz YYC, and we have our youth lab band program. And we'd like to see more girls in there. You mentioned a few things. What's something that you can take away today to do in your community? Well, I think we have things that we can do in our lab band to encourage more girls' participation and retention. And you mentioned having more inclusive education, safe spaces, some girls-focused activities, whether it's a band or a specific day. I wanted to ask how to get that started, because I think there's some attitudes to get past about creating girls-only band is now sequestering people, or maybe the day it becomes sort of tokenism or whatever. So in getting started and managing the attitudes and maybe possible pushback that you get to that, how to go forward, how to get started.
I think those Jazz Girls Days are great examples. This is a concept that was started at Berkeley High School about about nearly a decade ago, and I've seen it move around the country and internationally too, as just one workshop day, and to promote it not as like a super opportunity or as being something exclusive or not for the boys, but just something fun to engage in. And it's actually pretty easy to put together. I found you don't need too many resources. The most resources is usually I put usually an all-female mentor group together, and so the fees for that. But other than that, if you have a school and some rooms, I love to make them some T-shirts because they go home with their Jazz Girls Day T-shirts and they love it. But I've found that there's very little pushback and more and a lot of excitement to do that. And I talked to Jazz Denmark, who has even a whole camp. They have a whole concept that they do, and they're putting it in several European countries, and it's doing really well too. So, I mean, that's something to get started. And of course, if you see, maybe exclusivity is not the right thing, there should be always the openness to expand. But I do think the initial environment of having the role models and the safe space of not being worried about all the puberty issues of, having to show off or not to show off is really important as an initial encouragement. And then you can start this feeder program. It's really easy to put together. And if you have some questions, I'd be happy to share how I usually approach it.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful, and I can see that a Jazz Girls Workshop Day in Calgary would be easy to put together and draw from all of the high school and junior high school programs and recruit band members.
Yeah.
I wanted to start it here in Vienna, and we put it on the books in June, and nobody signed up, and I was so disappointed. And so when I got here, I thought, how can we change that? And I looked at, how you reached out. And one of the feedback that I usually get is why they're coming is because their band director told them so. And so right now I'm going to like all the schools in the Weiter Vienna area, and I'm making these connections to the music teacher saying, hey, we're going to do this in March, and send them out. So it takes some outreach effort too.
That brings a second question for me. It's a really good point, because whether it's a girls lab band or applying for the board or applying for a job, girls and women tend to think that it's somebody else who's more qualified than me that should apply for that. I can see how getting tapped by the band teacher to say, you should go, this is for you, is so important.
I do agree. I saw like one of the radio big bands in Germany has a job for saxophone players out now. And, we were so trying saying to all my friends, hey, you should apply. And yeah, unfortunately, they're all going, I'm not good enough. I can't do it. So it is a barrier. Yeah.
It is a barrier. Yeah.
Well, I think another thing, and Monika, you alluded to it earlier, was the attitude of men. I'm going back to Lewis here and Lee Morgan. The attitude of the practitioners that are male. They themselves are very often exclusionary to women. And I play a lot of things with men, and they're at the best, they're sort of benign about women. It just doesn't come up, the inclusion of them. And I think there's just the unconscious bias. Leonard Feather had a thing called Jazz Club USA in the 1950s. He took the Beryl Booker trio throughout Europe, and he also championed Billie Holiday. Obviously a vocalist, so a bit of a stereotypical kind of thing, but he was also a champion of the Sweethearts of the group that you mentioned earlier, and women in general. I've been in contact with his daughter Lorraine, who lives in Rochester, And she not only was he a champion of gender equality, but also racial equity, and he was a member of the NAACP. So a lot of these efforts have been going on for decades, but it's, as you pointed out, it's so slow. The change is so slow. And I think by articulating this to educators, particularly male educators, I think that's one step in the right direction, making a change.
Yeah, and I often hear of saying, well, I don't discriminate, I have nothing against them. But the thing is that it takes, it's like a circle where we have the issues at the root, and then, the curriculum, and later, and media. And it takes conscious efforts to slice into the circle at different places if you want to entice change. The hard thing, and I know this is very difficult, is that jazz is a very small marketplace. And of course, if you add some other things in, it means some things go out. This is not going to expand. And, and that's sometimes where I think too, in terms of advocacy, is, but are we entitled to take something away from others? So this balance is also a tricky issue. And who would you expect to be an advocate? But it also means, giving up things, and what's the goal of it? I mean, I see it as just a better music and a better representation and a better economic structure. But it is an issue that, it's a very small marketplace, and it's already hard enough.
Any other questions in the gallery here?
Well, I don't have a question. It's just a thought. Right, and I'm very hopeful that the educators would push this forward and create a role model for young girls to look up to. Coming from a third world country like they say, although many people argue against that narrative, but it is what it is. It's twice as hard, being an African as a girl and wanting to go into music. You should be out of it by default. I mean, as an African young man wanting to study music, you're crazy, right? So as a girl, it's twice as hard. But if we have that role model, and they can point to, oh, this person is doing well, that person is doing well, it's encouraging, right? Sometimes when I circle back home, I call friends and family, oh, they like Rihanna, oh, they like Beyonce, she's successful, I want to be like her, right? If it's like that in jazz, and they can point you, they don't have to check on Google, it's just all over the place. I think it's encouraging to young 5-year-olds in Nairobi, in Kenya, in Lagos, wherever. I mean, it's an encouragement to them. So I hope this flags off early and sustainable.
I agree. I mean, the role of role models can't be overstated. You always, when you see when networks form, it's usually by similarities or, people who look like you. It's easier to come into a network. And, I remember seeing when I started with my jazz interest at a jazz festival, I've seen Carla Bley, and she stood in front of that big band and was conducting with her wild hair, and then she went to the organ and played, and my jaw just dropped, and I was like, that's what I want to do, and I think I can, So yes, providing those role models is an absolute crucial element.
And I feel badly sometimes for women in jazz. You again alluded to it. Sometimes they overfunction. They're not natural, and that saddens me because I in some sense, they're trying to act like a man, and that's not right. I think a woman deserves to be a woman, a man deserves to be a man. But I sometimes see women trying to act like the guys in the band, and I find it disturbing. And it's kind of, it's just sad.
Mm-hmm. That's the equality doesn't mean sameness issue.
Any other questions? All right, well, I think we'll wrap it up with that. Monica, thank you so much. And Jeremy, congratulations on this book in putting out
Yes.
some of the resources that we need to be able to use as building blocks for educational programs and awareness and everything else. It's a huge accomplishment. And thank you for sharing it with us. And such practical suggestions about how to start addressing the issue of inequality and how to get girls in and keep them there and create a more equitable environment for the music where everybody's voice can sing as it should. So thank you again. And I hope that next year you will be here in person. Okay.
Me
Yes.
too. Me too. Thank you for having me. And nobody leave the room without something in mind that they can do today.
Got it.
Thank you so much, Monica.
Thank you.
All the best.